All right. Do you need the clicker? I need it? Oh, yeah. But which way does it go?
The right button.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's loud.
So after I do your... Hey, everybody on the live stream and who's dialing in. We'll get started in about 3 more minutes.
Damn right. I've had too many energy drinks, which actually dehydrate you. Absolutely. Let me make sure I'm okay. No. I'm just going to go through like the basic stuff and also answer your question. So what we're going to start with? How?
I'm just going to do your intro and then you go through your.
Okay.
When you're done and you hit that last one, then I'll come back up and we'll do the question.
Sure.
And then questions.
So it's like 15 minutes for the slides?
30.
30 minutes for the slides? Oh, wow.
You got a lot. Take your time.
Okay.
I'll wait at you.
Sure.
Get in your time.
Okay. That's good to know.
Or if you get them, then I can always back.
Yes. Plus, I love the Q&A part so much more.
You go with all that social media stuff?
I'm done. Yes. Done. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Hi. Would you like to say anything?
No.
Okay.
Other than that's a nice Optimus Prime.
That is a very nice Optimus.
Yeah, Cruz loaned it so he could have good luck. So hi, everybody. Hi, folks that are dialed in on GVC or live stream as well. Welcome to the Creative Speaker Series. We are hosting this via way of the YouTube UX team. This is the first kickoff one for this season. So come back for more. There'll be invites. Things will go out over email. You'll hear about them. Interesting creative speakers lined up throughout the rest of the year. Everything from printmaking to underwater basket weaving, we will cover with a unique audience. So I would love to introduce a wonderful old friend of mine today that I'm so excited was able to take time off his busy schedule and come up to visit us from LA. So allow me for a moment to get formal and read from the notes. Brandon Easton, otherwise in my life known as B, is an amazing professional writer, sci-fi geek as a whole, educator, and you're based out of LA. He was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and over the course of a long and industrious career has made his way out here to California. Graduated from Ithaca College, which is where we met and how we knew each other, got to geek out, with a BA in sociology. So some of you may ask, then how did you get into writing for Hollywood shows and movies? He'll cover that. It's an amazing, interesting story. Highlights of the career, deciding to pursue those screenwriting dreams, First, he started history and economics. Again, doesn't really relate to this field, so we really want to know how you got out here. And then we started with, let's start with a big title that some people here know. We'll identify ourselves by age, the Thundercats TV series. And let's fast forward to today, Transformers Rescue Bots, which is a favorite in our household, by Hasbro. So anyway, years before making the move to LA, Brand really achieved a really amazing goal that he set out for himself, and it was to be a graphic novel creator. I don't know how many of you wish for that, but I still do. By proxy, I'm living through you, my friend.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. I'm not going to go through all the titles because there's many books around and there's a lot you can see. There's a lot to read on this guy online. But I will say that one of the big call outs, though, was the Eisner Award. Do you want to tell us real quick about that one? Because it's a lot of people have never heard of that award, but the name may sound familiar.
Yeah, the Eisner Award is named after the graphic novel master, Will Eisner. And it's the equivalent of the Academy Award or the Oscar for the comic book industry. And I did a short, I was nominated for Best Single Story or One Shot back in 2014 for a book I did called Watson and Holmes, which is a like an African-American reinterpretation of the Sherlock Holmes mythos, but set in modern Harlem. And I did issue number 6, which was a story of a sex-trafficked transgender sex worker who ended up in this plot with a Harlem politician. And it was actually the first crime story I ever wrote in my entire life.
That's
and I got nominated for it. Yeah.
That's a heavy topic for a first go.
Yeah, and it was great. It was based on an article I read in the Village Voice many years ago. So yeah, that was my Eisner Award.
Also in 2014.
Yes.
One that I was so proud to see on your resume was that you wrote the documentary Brave New Souls, which was about Black sci-fi and fantasy writers of the 21st century, something a lot of people don't know enough about. And you've educated on the topic as well of what it's like to be a minority in an industry where people don't normally see or recognize people of color. So that's fantastic. I'm going to shut up and actually let you talk because we're really interested to understand your background, learn more about your history, what it takes to actually be a screenwriter, a graphic novelist, and just some other cool stuff. And yes, I will ask interesting questions later about any Hollywood gossip or dirt that you can give us.
Disney-Fox merger.
Yes, speak on that, please. Okay, floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you. Okay. So first, hello, thanks for coming out. This is really awesome to be in YouTube. I'm like stunned that I'm actually in the YouTube building. This is crazy. So that's me, Brandon Easton. Feel free to add me on Twitter and Instagram. I don't really post too much, but you know, there's some cool stuff there every now and then. I have 2 podcasts I do, and this is particularly for people who are interested in writing or developing their writing chops. The first one is called Writing for Rookies. And what I did with that, when that started in 2005, when I was still living in New York City, and it's almost like it's like an autobiographical podcast in a way, in a sense that it tracks me from being a teacher in New York City to getting my first gigs in LA. And I just give advice about how to write, how to start from scratch. And the particular focus is for science fiction or graphic novel creators, because there really wasn't up until about 2002 or 3 any guide or I guess signposts for people to get into that world. And I decided to fill in that gap. And I haven't updated that podcast in a couple of years, but the totality of it all, it goes from 2005 to about 2016. So I think that if you are interested in any of that stuff, it's pretty cool. And then there's a lot of commentary about social events. So stuff that was going on from the Iraq War all the way up into the election of Barack Obama. Generally speaking, that's all the material that gets covered on top of all the writing material. Then there's the 2 Brandons podcast. Now, what that means is this. There's another African-American comic book writer named Brandon Thomas, and we always get confused for each other, even though we look nothing alike. Like, people will bring his books to me to sign and vice versa. So we do a podcast called The 2 Brandons, and it's really a pop culture conversation. We talk a lot about writing, but we're very big Star Wars fans, so there's a lot of arguments about Star Wars and Star Trek. He hates Star Trek, whereas I'm a huge Star Trek and Star Wars fan. So I've never had to fight. So, you know, I don't have that internal struggle. But it's about, we talk about everything, but If you ever want to hear some really interesting commentary from a perspective you don't normally get in pop culture conversations, the Two Brandons podcast is one I would strongly recommend checking out for everybody. Please check that out if you get a chance. So as Dee, said already, I was born. Ooh, whoa, sorry about that. I was taking a second to go back. There we go. As Dee said, I was born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. Went to Ithaca College and graduated in '97. And then went to Boston University for film and television screenwriting, earned my MFA. And then after I moved to New York City, things weren't going too well. So I enrolled in the New York City Teaching Fellowship, and I was at CUNY Lehman College, and I earned my second master's in history, basically history, social studies teaching, for all intents and purposes. Now, the reason why sociology meant so much to me, one, at Ithaca, I was dirt poor and broke. Nobody paid for me to get to college. I worked really hard, but I couldn't afford to do the film program because at the time, this is before the digital revolution, you had to buy your own film stock. So what was it was like $100. Oh no, it was like $36 for 100 feet of Tri-X Eastman Kodak film, 16 millimeter. And out of 100 feet, you can only get about a usable 15 to 30 seconds. So it would add up if you wanted to do even a 5-minute short film. I couldn't afford that, but one thing I had learned in my freshman year was that sociology helped me to understand my own life, because being from Baltimore, especially growing up during the crack cocaine years, which, was dramatized somewhat in the show The Wire, David Simon's seminal work, there were things I didn't understand, things I had seen. And when I got to Ithaca College, their sociology program was actually extraordinary, and I got a chance to learn the whys and wherefores about social conditioning, stratification, the intersection between race, class, and gender, things of that. Ithaca is well known for it's kind of a feminist stronghold because of the history of the Seneca Convention being not far from there and so forth and so on. So I got a chance to not only learn more about the politics of race, but I also got a chance to learn about the politics of gender and class and sexuality, which came out a little bit later in terms of my own awakening by having LGBTQ friends in my life. And that changed my perspective on a ton of things, While in Boston, I worked in Harvard Square at a store called Anime Crash. It was right around the corner from the JFK School of Government, those of you familiar with Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I lived in Cambridge right between MIT and Harvard. But to make some extra money, I worked at this company, and we were one of the biggest importers of Japanese animation in Hong Kong cinema, especially the works of John Woo and Donnie Yen, Jet Li, and Jackie Chan at the time. And this is right around the time when Hong Kong had got handed back over to the Chinese government from Great Britain. So it was a very interesting period of time. And I was a part of kind of like that the second wave of anime hitting the shores. And that opened me up to understanding different ways of storytelling, because I had grown up watching, anime, where we talk about Akira or Ghost in the Shell was later, but Akira was the one that really changed the world for me. And I got to see Akira at the Baltimore Museum of Art, and that fundamentally shifted the way I thought about storytelling. So working at the Crash Pad was a dream come true. And that kind of laid the groundwork for more of my storytelling. And I taught U.S. history and economics in New York City public schools for about 6 years. I taught 3 years in the Bronx in middle school, and middle school is absolutely horrible. It eroded all the patience I had left for human beings, and it was all gone. So high school was so much better because you could actually threaten them with graduation and, not graduating, I should say. So I broke in the comic book industry in 2002 on Dreamwave Productions, which is no longer around. People confuse that with DreamWorks, but no, this is Dreamwave. They were a Toronto-based comic book company headed by Pat Lee, who was a very famous comic book artist at the time. There was a series called Arcanium that I broke in. That was my first published comic book work, and followed by Transformers Armada, also in 2002. And one of the things I had always heard about breaking into comics is once you get one book out, it's relatively easy to move on. That's not true at all. It's all a political game, just like Hollywood is. And I didn't know that you needed to be a member of certain types of cliques in order to get more work. So I struggled to break in until somebody just said, dude, you need to create your own material, not work for somebody else, create your own stuff. And that led to the construction of Shadow Law, which is a story of a disgraced mecha pilot who ends up in a concentration camp that's actually a feeding zone for vampires. And that was because I hate vampires and I wanted to kill them as much as possible because this is right. And so I was like, why don't we write a book with that? And that kind of goes into not following a trend, which is something I always tell writers not to do, because at the end of production, there's still a space between production and publication, whether it's independent or through a official publisher. So if you try to follow a trend, by the time your book or whatever hits the market, that thing is already passed. So the zombie wave is kind of dying out now. So don't do a zombie book, I would say. Or if you're going to do it, do something different with it, sort of like a parody or satire, something really cute, funny, but don't follow the Walking Dead pathway or the George Romero stuff. Do your own thing. So after Shadow Law dropped, it took me 6 years to get it done because of art teams and all this other stuff. And it actually hit in January 2012, and we sold out really fast. And that led to my first writing award ever, which was the 2013 Glyph Award for Best Writer. So that was at the end of a long period of time. And in between that, I left New York City, and I didn't even finish the book until after I moved to LA. So the Shadow Law was like a labor of love. It really broke me in half, but I got it done. And that was the most important thing. So after teaching in New York City for 6 years, I decided to take a chance on my dreams of being a screenwriter. It took a massive risk because I had a great life. I had a great apartment in the North Bronx, which I still regret giving up. It's not too far from the Bronx Zoo, for those who know New York City, like Allerton area, right behind the Botanical Gardens. I had a really nice apartment. It was, good God. Anyway, I still see that apartment in my head. But I made a big mistake because I moved here right after the writer's strike of 2007, which crippled the industry and ended so many shows. And when you move into a creative industry after a strike initiated by those people that you want to work, as a writer, I moved in and people were like, we hate all writers. So it took me 3 years to actually get anything done from 2008 to 2011. And my Boston University connections and a lot of hustling led to me getting my first writing assignment, which was co-writing episode 24 of the Thundercats reboot in 2011. And that was really cool. I mean, it was an amazing property. I wish it had gotten a lot more attention, but it came on at a really bad time. It came on, I think, on 8:30 on a Friday. And the trick with that is it was up against WWE SmackDown back then. And the trick is this: one thing people don't understand about programming is if a show is 1 hour or 2 hours, no one's leaving that show at the half-hour mark. So people who started watching SmackDown were not turning at 8:30 to watch Thundercats. It's the same demographic. That's why I compare those two. So the show got canceled, but it was my first real assignment, which led to me getting another credit, which was on Transformers Rescue Bots for the Hub Network, which is I think they're called Discovery Kids now. It was a Hasbro channel, but Transformers Prime, G.I. Joe Resolute, a bunch of other stuff came on. My Little Pony, came back as a result. And during this time, I was going to San Diego Comic-Con and doing panels. And I met the owners of a company that was about to start called Lion Forge. And they're based out of St. Louis. And it's an African-American owned comic book and media company. And they signed me to a 6 graphic novel deal, which led to the production of Andre the Giant, Closer to Heaven, which is incidentally my most acclaimed project of anything I've done. Is the most critically acclaimed. And it happened to be my first nonfiction work. I'd never done a nonfiction graphic novel, and let alone a biography. And we had the blessing, and I worked with Andre's daughter, who she lives not too far from me up in the Seattle area. And she was just amazing. She gave me stories about the man that I didn't know. Now, I'm a wrestling fan, so I knew I could pretty much fill in the gaps for his professional career, but the man's personal life, I knew very little to nothing about. And also the trick was, when you're writing about someone's life, it is very easy to dip into the salacious. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to make sure I talked about the light and the dark. And with Andre, he had a lot of personal problems, which are outlined very clearly in the book, but I didn't want it to be about that. And in the beginning of it, I try to lay out the theme, which is humanity kind of rests between the light and the dark. There is no one thing. We kind of skirt the line and we dip into both. And you'll see that with him all the way up until the last page, I think. And I would strongly recommend everyone who is here pick up the book. I think it's fantastic. You don't have to be a wrestling fan to like it. And if you've only seen him in The Princess Bride, I mean, I do a little bit of that in there, like Anybody with a Peanut, that's in there. So Yeah, that's Andre the Giant Closer to Heaven. I also recommend checking out Lion Forge, which is another book I have here called Incidentals, which is about a superhero team moving to LA. And they fight and their villain. The villain of the piece is a evil producer who uses the power of fear to attack people. So he creates these Blumhouse style movies, goes to the movie theater on opening night just to absorb all the fear from the audience. So that was something we created. And it was also our meta look at working in the industry and the darkness that exists behind the scenes. So we could get away with doing certain things without naming names. So 2014, I applied to the Disney ABC writing program and was chosen as one of the final 8 out of nearly 2,000 applicants for a 1-year fellowship at Disney ABC, which is a massive umbrella as of this. It's the biggest umbrella in the world right now for pop culture and entertainment. And it's a program set up for writers, and those are my cohorts. They're all doing many incredible things right now. And the program is set up to kind of find people who normally wouldn't get a shot at a job in LA, particularly people of color and women. And it places you on shows. And as a result of me being in that program, I was staffed on season 2 of Marvel's Agent Carter, which was an amazing experience. It's still, you know, it was the first live action 1-hour show for a network I ever did. And I got to contribute to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which, Jesus Christ, I'm still stunned by that, because things I put in there kind of reverberate, whatever that word is, are throughout some other shows and movies, which is pretty cool, I think, you know. Okay, so moving ahead a little bit, after Agent Carter, I got hired. I was approached by IDW to do a Transformers one-shot called Deviations, which was an alternate universe version, sort of like the Marvel What If. And what I postulated was, what if Optimus Prime didn't die in Transformers, a movie from 1986, which was like, for people of the 80s, that was a tragic moment for us all watching, like Spock dying. It was next to that, it was Optimus Prime dying in Transformers, a movie. And I got to write what would happen if he did not pass away. And it was a very interesting alternate tale that was fairly controversial, because a lot of Transformers fans like attacked me on Twitter as a result. And I wasn't ready for it. But then I learned how to deal with Twitter hate. It's a whole different mindset. So later, I was hired by IDW to develop and reboot the 1980s action adventure property Mask, Mobile Armored Strike Command. I don't know why it's spelled with a K. I was going to explain that one day, but I never got a chance to do it. We got canceled after issue 10. But there was a shared Hasbro universe in comics called Revolution that included Transformers, G.I. Joe, Rom, Space Knight, Micronauts, Action Man, Jem, and My Little Pony. And that was a lot of fun to work on. It ended about almost 2 years ago, but it was a lot of fun to work on. After that, I got hired to adapt the unreleased Vampire Hunter D short story into the graphic novel miniseries Vampire Hunter D Message from Mars. Now, Vampire Hunter D by Hideki Kikuchi is not only a novel series in Japan, long running, but it's also they made it into 2 animated films. And that was one of those animes that came on Sci-Fi Channel or TNT or TBS in the middle of the night. And that introduced a lot of people to it. And Vampire Hunter D is a horror, fantasy, sci-fi hybrid that is absolutely amazing. And Message from Mars graphic novel, our final version of that should be out either at the end of 2019 or in early 2020. I would strongly recommend it if you like fantasy, action, adventure, science fiction, horror. Then I was approached right after doing that into adapting 2 Vampire Hunter D, not in prose novels, into a television series. And I completed that in 2018. I don't know when it's going to be on the air because they're still dealing with the production side. But Vampire Hunter D, the series, has been written. And for those who are fans out there, keep an eye out. There's a Vampire Hunter D Twitter and Instagram feed you should check out about updates on the series. Then recently, this year, I was announced to be one of the writers for Star Trek Year 5, which will be official canon, filling in the gaps on the final mission, the final year of the original Starship Enterprise. If you remember, they always said we were on a 5-year mission, but you only got to see 3 of them because it got canceled. Well, we're doing Year 5. I'm part of the writing team. It's like 5 of us. The trick with that, and those of you who are Star Trek fans out there, we're trying to get them to the people you see at the beginning of Star Trek 1, the motion picture, because they're not, because if you look at the movie and look at where they were in season 3, they're not exactly the same people. But at the end of Year 5, you'll see why they split up and why they end up in the places they are at the beginning of that movie, especially Kirk, McCoy, and Spock. there's some changes that are on the way, and you get to see that. In fact, issue 1 drops next month in April 2019. I don't know the date yet, the street date, but it's coming. So yeah, if you're a Star Trek fan, we really do some inside baseball stuff for Star Trek folks, but it's also open to people who don't watch Star Trek or don't. You can just jump in and get a really cool action adventure space opera. So please keep an eye out for that. I also have here Star Trek Waypoint. This came out last year. This is an anthology series that IDW puts out, which kind of fills in little holes in the Star Trek mythos. It's like all kind of really cool short stories. For those of you who really know Star Trek, I did a short story where Q from Next Generation meets V'ger, which is the creature that is Voyager at the end of Star Trek 1. Because at the end, it turns into a new life form and it disappears. And I thought to myself, well, it had to go someplace, ends up in the Q continuum. And Q teaches him or her, it actually, how to be a omnipotent being. So that's what that short story is about. There's a bunch of other ones in there, especially a fan favorite of Data's cat. There's actually a story of Data's cat Spot in this adventure, so in this anthology. So check that out when you get a chance. And that brings me up to Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. March 2019, Variety and Deadline introduced a new production. I can't talk too much about it or anything about it, but it's called Transformers War for Cybertron Siege. It's the first in the planned trilogy that reboots the history of the Cybertronian Civil War. Those of you who've seen Bumblebee, the beginning of that, first 5 minutes, think of that when you think about Siege. It's going to be very, very much in that kind of vein. I'm one of the writers. We're done with the writing for season 1. And I think it's going to hit Netflix in 2020. I just don't have a date yet. So keep it. That was a dream. I'm a huge Transformers fan. And the process of writing that was incredible, which I'll talk about just my writing process in general over the course of the next 30 minutes. And that should conclude everything. And again, it's awesome to be here, and I'm ready for questions, to talk to Dee, and eventually Q&A from the audience here and abroad. Thank you.
So many questions in so little time. Mm-hmm. That's all right though, because I can call you later. Okay, so first question I had was just, let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
How do you even go about landing a project to write for like a pilot or a TV show? What process do you have to go through to pitch yourself?
Okay, so you're saying if you don't have any connections in the business, how do you get a job as a writer in Hollywood?
Yeah, help some folks out that are probably on the call.
Okay, so this is tricky. Where do I begin? This will take 3 hours. I'll do it in like 3 minutes. The trick is you really need to just get to know people. I mean, the traditional route would be to get a internship in the mailroom at a major agency like CAA, ICM, UTA, WME, many other ones. And what happens is you kind of have a cohort. And the way I describe Hollywood to people is sort of like college, especially. That in your freshman year, generally speaking, you know a bunch of people in your dorm, you eat with people, you hang out with people you really don't have anything in common with, but that's part of the college experience. And by the time you get to your senior year, your circle has dropped from maybe 20 to probably like 4 or 5, generally speaking, right? Hollywood's the same way. You have a cohort. It's an unofficial one. It's not like a class of 1995, a class of 2020, but whoever you come in with tends to be your crew. And that crew will obviously branch out into different arenas, and they will keep you in mind. And basically you get hired by your friends. It's very much a referral-based industry. It took me years to realize this, because I just thought that you could just be good, show up for work and do what you have to do. But no, so much of the business is going to these awful networking events where you have to come up with stuff to talk to people about you have nothing in common with. And everybody knows you want something from them, but you have to figure out a way to, connect. And the trick is really don't try to reach up. Don't try to, like if somebody's a showrunner, they're not going to bring you in their circle, generally speaking, because they're seniors now. And when you're a freshman, you don't get the chance to hang out with seniors unless you're related to them or in other ways, having other kind of relationships with them. But generally speaking, you have to figure out a way to connect with people who are all in your same level, and then bond with them, and then you all move up together. Because like I said, rising tide raises all boats, right? That is very true. So that's how it's done. It's really referral based and a lot of hustle. You have to, I'll tell you what I did. There are all these secret little networking events that happen around town. And one of my buddies, is on a like an Asian American like political action committee list, and Disney writing program had invited him because he's a part of a minority group or whatever, and he forwarded me that email. I wasn't supposed to get that email, but I showed up anyway, and I just prayed that no one would say you can't come in. So I took a risk and showed up at something I couldn't show up. I shouldn't have been at. But because of that, I laid down the infrastructure and the seeds to get to know people later, which would lead to me in some small way getting into the 2015 ABC writing program. So it's a lot of taking chances and like sneaking into things you don't belong at. And for me, it's difficult because I'm kind of conspicuous, particularly in LA. So for me to get into places, I have to be really, 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 really strategic. I'm not even short, so it's like I have black male friends who are like 5, 6, 7, and they get into places. I'm like, how did you get into that? So for me, I had to be particularly intrepid and tricky about getting around the industry because there are obstacles set up specifically to keep folks out. And it's not about race, class, or gender. It's just they don't want people in it because the more people in it, that means there's more competition. So they deliberately create these artificial obstacles to keep people out, which are absurd because, as you can tell, like with Jordan Peele and other people, not just him, every time you get people who have a different perspective in there, things shatter. They get better, but they don't. It's a very incestuous, closed mentality that they think that new people will hurt them or take away their jobs. And when actually new people create more opportunities because more people make money. Like Black Panther opened the door for a lot of things, as did Get Out, as did even like Jane Campion's The Piano years ago, things of that nature. Or even American Psycho, Mary Harmon and Guinevere Turner wrote that. I mean, there are things done by women you might not think are done by women that really shattered some, boundaries and shattered some glass ceilings. What's her name? Catherine Bigelow. Mm-hmm. She directed things like Near Dark, which is like this bizarre biker, like redneck vampire film. But she shattered conventions because she had a different way of looking at things. And so I feel like those artificial constructs are actually what eventually hurts Hollywood and the creative output, because not everybody gets to talk. And when you have the same type of people telling the same type of stories, you tend to run into this kind of over concentration, which leads to stagnation. And
that
that's
is the most
going on.
massive plug for diversity and inclusion I think I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Dope.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I still have this vision of you in a dark dorm room sitting lit only by the light of a computer screen.
Yes.
So what's a day in the life like for you now? I really hope that you get a little more sunshine. What's your creative process like?
Somewhere in Burbank or Pasadena, or it's on my apartment in Long Beach. I just lean over it. Yeah, I mean, I go to the Writers Guild,
Mm-hmm.
which is on Fairfax and Third for those of us in the Playa Vista office up in next to the Grove and the Farmers Market. I go over there because all the writers in the world are there and the showrunners are there. And they have a lounge specifically for writers. So when I'm not in an office, I tend to try to go to the Writers Guild lounge just so I can be around other human beings. We don't talk to each other because we're all writing. Plus, it's like kind of verboten to speak in the lounge. They actually have signs that say, "Don't talk in here. Like, go outside if you want to talk," because you get distracted or whatever. But it's very a writer's life is, and it's like a coder's life is can be pretty solitary because you're sitting in front of a computer doing a whole lot of writing that people aren't going to see that, and you have to finish it before it actually means anything. So there is a crossover between the IT world and the creative writing world because you are solitary. And see, I think me being an only child, I'm okay being by myself. But there are people who are more social animals than myself who kind of crumble under the weight. And for me, I am completely okay being in isolation and creating. But, it is something it's a skill. Learning how to be alone is a skill, particularly for folks who are more social and came from larger families. Because once you cut that kind of social umbilical cord off, people freak out. And that's one thing I had to learn was I'm okay. You have to learn how to be okay being by yourself.
Is it necessary though to be isolated like that too, right?
I think it is. Well, when you're writing a TV show, you go to a room for 10 hours a day, sitting across from people pitching ideas all day. And then you eventually get, hopefully you get picked to write an episode or co-write an episode of a show and you go off. But if you're writing a feature, if you're doing novels, if you're doing comic books, except for Star Trek Writers Room, you will be by yourself. And it is a very solitary thing where you have to learn. It's a skill, I think, honestly.
Yeah.
You know?
You mentioned, throughout this whole talk, there are these titles that we all know and have some connection to.
Sure.
Transformers, Star Wars, Star Trek,
Yes.
all those. How do you, going back to the whole Twitter hate thing, how do you write for these huge titles that have so much history and canon about them, and write in such a way that you are not offending what would effectively be like a rabid fan base that's looking for a mistake at any turn?
Well, that's impossible. Somebody's going to find fault with something, right? Particularly if you're dealing with an established universe. The trick is, and I say this all the time when I speak, I said, success and entertainment success is where business reality meets fan expectation, right? Because there's a business reality of what people can achieve, and then there's what fans want. And if you meet in the middle, that's when you find success. Marvel has done a great job at doing that. Now, specifically to answer your question, it's tricky because when you're talking about licensed properties, now none of these, except in this one, but all of these are based on something that somebody else owns. So when you're writing a licensed property, the parent company, let's say Paramount or Hasbro, and with Transformers, Hasbro, whoever, right? They have a set of guidelines that you cannot violate. You must stick, like, for example, if you're writing Star Trek, they don't like you to kill people. They want you to talk a problem out, particularly in the Next Generation era. With Kirk, you could blow things up a little bit. In Deep Space Nine, you could blow up stuff a little bit. But generally speaking, they like that Picard talk your way out of problems thing. So you have to figure out a way to be fun, exciting, but also maintain diplomacy. So it challenges you as a writer. But those guidelines are set up so you don't violate those things and expectations from fans. So the trick is figuring out a way to make it exciting. Because what can you say about Kirk that's new? What can you say about Optimus Prime that's new, or Superman, or Batman, or
you
whoever?
Tell us. You're getting ready to write the origin.
But what I'm saying is that you have to ask yourself that question. Yeah. What can you say? So you're given a certain amount of leeway, a little amount of wiggling room, and in that, you have to really go crazy with it. So, like for Mask, Mobile Armored Strike Command, the main character was originally a blonde white guy, but Hasbro asked me for diversity, so I turned Matt Tracker into an African-American male. And that was my way of adding something to it without making it overtly like it's just no kind of like message beating you over the head. But what it does do is show, okay, this person is there and they exist. And then I added an Indian woman to the team, and who originally, I think she might have been Indian or South Asian originally, but I made her more overtly so. And what else did I do? And then, I made some changes to some of the characters in a way that didn't violate Hasbro, but made it a little bit newer to look like what the world actually looks like now. So you can do things like that. With Transformers, which I can't talk about, there are things you can do because when Hasbro wants you to do something, you can do it. Yeah. If they let you do it. So that's the trick with licensed properties. And then if you're Christopher Nolan, you're given a remarkable amount of leeway, like the Dark Knight trilogy. Like he was able to do all these things that previous Batman filmmakers were not able to do, like kill people like whom really mattered to Bruce beyond his parents. Like in the Dark Knight, Maggie Gyllenhaal's character is murdered, killed. Spoiler. So things like that, So you have to look at it from that perspective. You're given a certain amount of leeway, and you have to be really smart about what you do with that.
Well, on behalf of brown girls and women everywhere, I would really love for you to write characters that look like us. Mm-hmm. So just a plug. Okay. Shall we play a game from the olden days?
More games. Let's do it.
Yes. Okay. So just for those who obviously weren't part of our little weird geeked out circle, we used to play a game where rapid fire question, I'd throw a question at Brandon to pick an option. So here we go.
Go for it.
Ready? Mm-hmm. All right. I want to see how these answers have changed over the years, if at all. Okay. And go. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Can't do it.
Kirk or Picard?
Kirk.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Top 3 movies of all time.
Citizen Kane, Akira, Blade Runner.
I still respect you for that. Okay. Top 3 graphic novels.
Planetary Omnibus, Watchmen, and The Dark Knight Returns.
Watchmen, yes. Okay. DC or Marvel?
Can't do that one.
Come on.
I can't because I love them both. They were both equally influential.
No, Marvel all day.
Okay.
Dude, we kicked out in comic book stores. Okay, anyway, New York or LA?
Oh, New York. That's easy. Yeah.
Most watched or favorite YouTube video?
I talked about this earlier. It's Ownish Pranks. There's this guy named Russell who's a voice actor. He does all these prank calls. I know it's ridiculous, but it's the funniest thing you've ever heard. So it's probably that. And somebody's been splicing together Star Wars scenes that get rid of all the garbage stuff. So I watch a lot of that because they have like the Battle of Scarif, but just the spaceship part. So I've been watching a lot of, and somebody edited the end of Rogue One with the beginning of New Hope. So
wait. Okay, sorry, geek moment. I'm not even gonna laugh at that because this says a lot about us.
Go for it.
No, go ahead.
So I've been watching. That's the stuff I watch. I like a lot of comedy stuff on YouTube because there's quite a bit of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Favorite screenwriter?
Patty Chayefsky, who wrote Network and a bunch of other stuff.
Project that you wish you'd written?
Interstellar.
Oh yeah. That was tearjerker. Moon landing, hoax or real?
That happened. Jesus
you
Christ.
Know. I know.
That's like the flat Earth people type of thing. It's
I know. I had to put it out there.
Yeah, we landed on the moon.
Okay. Final question, and then we'll pass off to Q&A for anyone who's either on or in the room. East Coast hip hop or West Coast hip hop?
East Coast.
Oh, you didn't even let me finish.
East Coast. Yeah. I would say 1989 to 94 East Coast. Absolutely.
I respect that, sir.
Yep.
Okay. Let's open it up for questions to folks in the room. Anybody?
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, I got a question about, I'd love to hear your thoughts on superhero deaths in the sense that it seems like the point of them was to give the story some type of like emotional gravitas or something, but we all know it's become such a trope and it's so pointless now that it feels frustrating and, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on, have you been forced to do that type of thing or have you been able to?
Nope. I mean, I haven't been lucky enough to work on one of the big Marvel or DC properties, but superhero deaths, I mean, you got to go back to the Dark Phoenix saga, the Chris Claremont, John Byrne, X-Men classic, which has informed all the X-Men books since then, early 80s. When Jean Grey, well, it wasn't really Jean Grey, when the Phoenix Force and Jean Grey's body looked like she passed away, it really sent a emotional shockwave through the fan base. I was there. I remember it. People were really upset. And I feel that the outcry and the outpouring of just sadness and regret really made a difference to the editorial team because they were like, wow, people really do care about these characters. Like when Optimus Prime died in Transformers a movie, then at the end of the next season, he's back to life. It's like, because people didn't realize that folks had grafted onto these characters so much. I mean, a lot of deaths are done just to boost sales, unfortunately. It is a trick. I mean, Wolverine died in Marvel Comics, now he's coming back. And I was like, he was dead for 18 months, maybe. The only person who stayed dead is the original Captain Marvel from the blonde, the one before Carol Dan, or the one before Monica Rambeau, really. He's been dead since he died. He's never come back. There's been a couple of characters here and there who died and stayed dead, but it really sucks because when Superman died in the early 90s, it was such a shock, and then he comes back. And I'm like, but you can't kill licensed characters with legacy characters, we call them. So I don't ever take it seriously when somebody dies in a comic. I don't even buy it anymore. I'm just like, I'll wait till they come back.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing, do you think people will stop doing it because there is just a fatigue now?
Well, I'll tell you a little secret. Comic books used to go through a 7-year cycle of rejuvenation. So what used to happen in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s is that after 7 years, people would stop buying comic books. So you get a fresh new set of pair of eyes on it, and they would go through the whole thing. So Galactus could come back and fight the Fantastic Four, and it would be new. But if you have fans who have been reading for 21 years, they've gone through that at least 3 times. So then they're starting to get fatigued, and it becomes a problem. So really, what the comic book industry has to do is get new readers. That way, your old tricks don't seem old to people who've been reading it for 21, 30 years even. Even me, I don't really buy a lot of the monthly books because they're doing things that were happening when I was a kid. So I'm just like, oh, that's great. Hopefully some new people, but new people aren't going into comic book stores. So that's where the problem really lies, because they'll always do that 7-year cycle of the same people dying and nonsense like that. But unfortunately, that's not to be the case anymore,
Oh, hey, Fred.
Hey, Brandon.
Hey, how
Thanks
you
for
doing?
coming.
Thank you.
My question's
Yeah.
about working with other writers. It sounds like, you know,
Mm.
it's very solitary, but when you're with a group of writers writing a piece, how do you work together? How do you bring harmony to everybody's styles and
Mhm.
everything else to create one piece?
It all starts with the leadership, the showrunners or the executive producer. If it's because usually when you have a team, it's because of a TV show. You very rarely have teams for movies. I mean, it happens, but it's not the standard. So if you have really strong leadership, smart leadership, who understands that the goal is to make the show the best it is, they're not going to play those games of, you know, little games, that, you know, little political games that happen sometimes. If you have that kind of room, then you're not going to have a problem because everybody's ideas are respected and the politics don't come into play. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. So some shows suffer under the weight of internal politics, and it makes the show bad because the people behind the scenes, they play favorites. Certain people get this, certain people get that. The way you work is you just go in and you leave everything outside. And what I mean by that, and I say this a lot on panels, like you have to leave your biases, your prejudices. And I don't mean like racial, I mean just life prejudices, like things that we think about. You got to leave that behind unless it is necessary for the story, right? But it's really about the leadership. And if you have strong leadership, they don't tolerate the infighting, the games, the immaturity. So basically, as long as you come in there with a goal in mind, and remember, with a TV show, it's about 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes more than that. I mean, there are times I worked on shows and we were in there for 12, 13 hours, right? You have to make sure that you keep your attitude correct. And I'm not going to get into all the things that can go wrong. I'll just say that as long as people have a sense of maturity, that's what's going to make, that makes all the difference in the world. And that's what helps you work with people. If your ideas are strong and you're there not to create a problem, but to work together, then you're not going to have a problem. And that's how we approach it. Just go in and do your job.
Hi.
Yes.
Here. Thanks for coming, Brandon. So
Thank you.
when you're writing for a graphic novel, do you like think of like the layout and the artwork of how it's going to be, and how do you communicate that to the artists?
So what you're doing in a graphic novel script, as opposed to everything else, is you're coming up with a series of still images in a narrative sequence. And you're basically describing a still photograph for your artist. So some writers go overboard, like Alan Moore, when he wrote Watchmen, his script for like 24 pages turned out to be like 50 because he would over describe everything in the scene. Some people like that. Warren Ellis, who's a very famous comic book writer, he does the opposite. He leaves it up a lot. He gives you very basic, very sparse descriptions and let the artist come in. And he gives you enough so you can get that seed and then draw it based on that. I'm somewhere, and I don't really do excessive, because I don't have time, I don't do excessive scripting for graphic novels, but I try to convey what needs to happen on that one panel. And that way, when it comes back, we're usually right, you know? And then that's where your editorial team comes in, where they make sure that what's written is what you see, and also what you see makes sense visually. And like, for example, I remember one time, one of my artists drew a table and the perspective was off. So it was like this medium shot of a room, but it was almost like this long, it was a long room. And the table, which was probably this long, looked like it was the length of the room because perspective was off. So the editor went in and said, you need to redraw that table. And they did. And it's little things like that, that if you read a comic and you see things look out of whack on, like not on purpose, like if you're looking at like Calvin and Hobbes, it's okay if things look weird, or the Peanuts, you know, Charlie Brown. But if you're dealing with like X-Men, like Wolverine's claws need to look the same on every panel. Some people draw them circular, some people draw them like knives. But if you started off drawing it circular, then it needs to be circular. If you like Spider-Man's web, some people draw it looking like a checkerboard. Other people draw it looking like a actual spinneret did it, like it's like circular. So whatever you do, it has to be internal consistency. So whatever I write needs to stay that way all the way through the end of the story. And the editors are there to make sure that's the case. So when I write the script, I'm just really trying to make sure that what I'm saying makes sense for the art team. And there are plenty of comic book scripts online. There's a comic book script database, archive, whatever, and you can take a look at it and see different people. Because there's no one way to write a comic book script. There is generally one way to write a movie or a TV script. So that's what the difference is, you know.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
I'm not basically really into graphic novels. I mean, I think I got stuck in the 80s or 85. I think that's my own experience, and that was with Jodorowsky, like the French.
Nice.
Do you find when you write graphic novels that your audience is growing with you, or do you attract new audiences? Is there like a cohort? I mean, how do you deal with that? Like,
that's a good question.
Are your ideas only attracting people who age with you?
Well, the trick is this. Now, it used to be a company, a publisher would help you grow an audience. They don't have the time or patience for that now. So what they do is they only hire people who have a pre-existing audience to bring to whatever property. Believe it or not, writers are getting hired or not hired based on how many Twitter followers they have. So if you have over 10 to 15, if you have over 15,000 followers on Twitter, you can get a job very easily because they feel that out of that 15,000, you could probably pull 8 to 10,000 over to those sales per month. And they really do believe this. So that's why a lot of writers have spent an inordinate amount of time building up a social media following. The way to grow your audience, because the comic book industry does not advertise very well, the way to grow your audience is doing the convention circuit and panels and things like this, where people get to see you who normally don't know you exist. So I do like WonderCon, San Diego Comic-Con, any number of conventions where I get to shake people's hands. I mean, the best thing to do as a writer is actually meet your potential audience. It's not like, going to a concert where people are paying to see you. You need to convince people that you're worth their time. And that takes a very long, Stephen King in his seminal work on writing talks about, how long it took for him to build a fan base. But at least at the time, his first, the book we think is his first novel, Carrie, it took a little while, but when he gained a following, he built on that by keep doing work and also being accessible. You need to be a little bit accessible now. It used to didn't have to be. You can't be a recluse, but now you need to be more accessible to the fans, or else you won't have a fan base. So it's trickier now than it used to be because you're supposed to have a social media presence as opposed to just being a writer and handing in your stuff and going back to your house. So yeah, you have to hustle to grow your audience as opposed to expecting them to find you now. Too many options.
We're almost at time. Does
Okay.
anyone on GVC have a question? Otherwise, we'll throw it to the last one in the room. Okay, last question here live.
question.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm just curious about how you, as an individual creative contributor and working with these mammoth companies, how do you maintain ownership of your work? And how do you not get taken advantage of by people that are giving opportunities?
Well, yeah, that's a good one. The trick is this, when you get hired as a freelancer, you're just a work for hire, right? So in the contract, it's implicit, particularly if it's a license, that you're not going to possess any ownership. The only good thing about working on licensed books is that your name will be attached to something that people wouldn't normally buy. Your name wouldn't be enough, but because you're on this thing, more eyes are on your name than previously before. But the real goal, and this for me, and this is where my biggest weakness is, I need to create more original material that I own completely, that I can do whatever I want with, like Robert Kirkman did with The Walking Dead, and so many other people, especially now. No one really takes advantage of you per se, because they are paying you. But the trick is, there's only so much you can do with licensed properties. So what I tell a lot of people to do, and I've had this conversation, is with many writers, instead of trying to break in writing something like this, take these ideas and twist it a little bit and make it your own. Like Todd McFarlane, famous comic book artist and writer, created Spawn, right, many years ago. Spawn is basically visually Spider-Man meets Batman, because he drew both. And he just basically took visually those two and then made it like this weird heaven versus hell, satanic type of crazy supernatural story. But at the heart of it is basically Batman goes to hell, really. And so that's an example of taking something, and Game of Thrones is basically the War of the Roses, the original, historically. But one thing that George R.R. Martin did, for different people have different views about this, he didn't romanticize the what do you call it, the Middle Ages, like the 13, 14, 15. He didn't romanticize it because rape was ubiquitous. Murder, people could just do, if you weren't a noble woman, and not even then, but if you weren't, you could just be sexually assaulted any time of the day, and he put that in. A lot of people don't like that, but it's like, 'cause I'm not a fan of watching that, but realistically, in that type of a world, if you don't have protection, anybody could be it's very real. And that's where Game of Thrones really took hold. But he didn't just tell like a Tolkien-esque story where just everybody's running around, everybody looks blonde and beautiful, blah, blah, blah. You know, he told a story where people look filthy, their teeth are bad, they stink, they rape and murder and pillage, and people get hurt every day. And that's what gave it a sense of gravitas, you know? So what I always tell folks is like, instead of worrying about the licensed properties, take the things you like from the ethos and then combine it to something new. Because that's what we all do anyway. So I would say that's the way to get around being like kind of hemmed in by licensed properties. Create your own material and then nobody can tell you what to do. Yeah, thank you.
That concludes today's first episode of the Creator Speaker Series here at YouTube. Brandon, thank you so much for your time, for coming up here.
This is really
we
awesome.
Enjoyed
thank
it.
You. Thank you so much. Wherever you are, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey. Awesome. That was so cool. Sure.